Alright guys, Bill M here, back with a new video, and in this video we're back talking about Survivor 45 with my now traditional mid-season power ranking, where just like many recent seasons of the show, this feels so early to be doing it. Again, only 5 episodes into what's probably going to be a 13 episode season. However, we are obviously nearing the Mergatory, which feels like this massive shift in the game to where I still feel like this is the right time to do it, right before the game starts to solidify and even the storylines start to solidify. So here I'll be ranking every player left in the game based on how likely I feel like they are to win the game, mostly based on how they're being portrayed on the show, not necessarily their in-game position. Along with that, we'll talk about the people that have been booted so far, my opinions on them, along with my general thoughts on the season. So then let's start off with my general thoughts, which so far Survivor 45 has been pretty good, surprisingly, where obviously the new era of Survivor has been very hit or miss for the most part, where obviously a lot of the seasons have felt very samey, obviously the exact same format and very similar twists thrown in, obviously no more themes, so through that it adds even less identity to each season. And again, this season does follow with that. However, obviously the big change here is the 90-minute episodes, which I do feel like has been a massive change for the positive. I do feel like with the 90 minutes we have been able to get to know this cast a lot more. I feel like there's been more time for downtime on the show that allows for more development of dynamics. And beyond that, I do think we have a pretty fun cast here. I do like this cast for the most part. And despite obviously the disappointments with the quits, I do feel like I've been really enjoying this season up to this point. Now, I will say I did not love this last episode. I feel this last episode is probably the weakest of the bunch. It felt like an episode that very much regressed back to how the show is being portrayed in the last few seasons, where this season seemed to get rid of the sob stories, seemed to make the dynamics a lot more clear on the show, and obviously that helps with the storytelling. I feel like this latest episode didn't do that. I think its focus on Emily potentially working with Brando and Kendra when it was so obvious that she wasn't took a lot away from the episode, alongside the fact that you got these like sob stories being added back in and a lot of focus on the journey. And again, it very much felt like us returning to the 41 to 44 style editing. But again, I thought we had a great first 4 episodes. While again, yeah, we got 2 quits along the way, which is not an ideal way to start the season, I still felt like it was a fun ride despite those quits. Or like, I think episode 3 is an all-time pre-merge episode, definitely an all-time pre-merge tribal. And again, last episode was really fun up to the point where Sean decides to quit out of nowhere. I was personally fine with the Hannah quit, especially considering I allowed Emily to stay in the game. And again, the downfall of Brandon I thought was really interesting as well. Again, I do feel like the season so far has been pretty strong, and I think there's a lot of interesting storylines being set up for down the road that I am personally really invested in how it plays out. I do feel like Survivor 45 has been pretty strong up to this point. Now that, let's talk about the booted players, talking about my opinions on them along the way. Starting it off with Hannah, who obviously a lot of people were very upset by her quit. I personally don't care. As I mentioned before, I'm okay with Hannah quitting. It allowed Emily to stay in the game. I think Emily is a lot more interesting of a character for the long term. And it was going to be a boring vote anyway, and I feel like Hannah quitting at least made the ending of the episode somewhat notable. I'm someone that doesn't get angry at people quitting Survivor. I understand why you would want to quit Survivor. I wouldn't want to be on Survivor. And I can get Hannah's point of view of her just simply realizing she doesn't want to be there. So I wasn't too bothered by her quit. And I'll say that I thought she came off as pretty endearing in her relationship with Brandon, her sweeping the ground for some reason. I liked Hannah on the show up to her quit, and again, her quit didn't really bother me too much. Then we got Brandon, who again, I thought was pretty fun TV. I mean, while yeah, you can criticize the fact that he's probably one of the worst challenge competitors in the history of the show, and he obviously didn't play the game that great either. I mean, I still feel like his run here was pretty fun, kind of like a subdued version of the Jacob Derwin, where sure, I think Brand's a better player than Jacob Derwin, where at least Brand was well liked socially. He was someone that would have survived that first tribal. He did seem like someone that people wanted to keep around. They just felt like they couldn't do the challenge strength. Like, I just found Brandon to be pretty endearing on the show. Again, I understand people's criticisms of why cast this person if they're not going to be good at the survival aspects and everything, but it's like, I don't care. So I personally don't mind if they put people like Brandon still on the show. But then we get Sabiyah, who I think it's clearly like the robbed pre-merge boot of this season. I mean, someone that, while a very messy player for sure, did seem to be a very strong player. One that I think if she was on Lulu, she probably would have done extremely well on this season. But because she was on this tribe that constantly had to lose, it was kind of forced into this leadership position on that tribe. I do feel like it obviously put her in a tougher spot there. Then also, even her vote off, even in itself, is very fluky. I mean, the fact that she gets voted out because she had an idol that she had to sacrifice a vote for, at least her getting voted on a 2-1 vote. Now again, should she have targeted Caleb? Probably not. Should she have trusted in Emily to go after Caleb? Also probably not, considering especially that that's part of the reason why they didn't trust Caleb to begin with. But again, I think on most given seasons, I think she should pretty much just easily get to the merge. I mean, I do feel like she's a player here that I was very wrong on in my preseason. I really did not feel like she had much strategic chops during my cast assessment. Again, I feel like I was wrong there, even though really the game played out almost exactly as I kind of expected it to for her. Next up, moving on to Sean. And Sean is just such a strange figure on this season. I mean, obviously he didn't get as much screen time as a lot of the other Lulus, clearly because of his eventual quit. But he seemed like a really fun personality. And he has this like really bubbly energy. And it seemed to translate to the game as well. Where again, he was at the top of the Lulu pecking order before the Sabiyah vote, where him and Sabiyah were the true power duo of that tribe. He then gets swap screwed to Reba and somehow manages to convince them to go after Sefue instead of him, to where J Maya wanted to keep him around as a number. It's like there's a lot of good stuff there on paper, but then he goes on to quit, and I still struggle with really wrapping my head around his quit. Where again, as I mentioned with Hannah, on a person level, like I don't mind people quitting. I mean, I can understand why you would want to quit, but Sean seems like a quit that was done for like misguided reasons, where again, with Hannah, it's like, okay, she knew she couldn't take it. She quit. It makes sense. With Sean, it seems like he just got extremely emotional one moment and then told everyone to vote him out and then like immediately regretted it. It's like very strange how his quit happened. And again, I didn't like the overall tone of it. The tone of it feeling like he quit because he felt like he was about to lose. Where, while again, it does seem like Sefue would have gone home for that round, I do feel like part of it does come from the fact that he very much struggled in the game, obviously. Again, obviously he was on Lulu, this tribe that had very few numbers. He lost his closest ally in Sabiyah, and now he was on this position where if that tribe had gone to tribal again, they were probably going to send him out. And it just very much felt like he kind of gave up due to him being in this like losing position. It's like I just find it very tough to wrap my head around Sean just in general on this season. Like not even just his quit, but even mixing that in, how does that affect his gameplay? How is he as a player in this game? Where again, he was able to flip everything around for him only to then just quit despite that. And really, again, Sean left me pretty perplexed on this season to where I really don't even know what to truly think of him. But finally, we got the latest boot here in Brando, who was there. I mean, Brando seems like a nice guy. I mean, he seems like someone that's obviously a massive fan of the show. But, I mean, he really didn't do much on this season. He did seem to get one of the quieter edits of the bunch, an edit that didn't really have much substance to it. It didn't really feel like he had much depth as a character on the show, or it seemed like he was only shown when necessary, aka essentially for Sweat and Savvy. Also being set up as being in the middle of the tribe on Bello. Also his eventual downfall. Like as a character, again, I don't feel like there's much to really say about him. As a player, again, he does get swap screwed. I mean, obviously, it does seem like he would have been in a good position had he been on the original Bello tribe the entire time. Again, something that would have happened on every other New Era season. But I do think the fact that he loses the fight for Emily's vote is pretty indicative of some pretty poor play there. I mean, the fact that Austin and Drew are able to get Emily on board over Kendra and Brando, despite the fact that Kendra supposedly had a relationship with Emily through her visit in episode 1. Again, I think that's pretty bad on the Bello side of things there, where I think it does show Brando just getting completely outplayed by the likes of Drew and Austin. So he's another one that, again, I don't know how to really assess his game. I feel like, yeah, he's swap screwed to a degree, but it wasn't even like he was in a completely damned position after being swapped. He just didn't really take advantage of it as much as other people. I just feel like I put a lot more blame on Brando for his boot than someone like Sabiyah in particular, but still, like someone that did seem like he had some potential in the game, could have been this fun narrator, but we just simply didn't get to see it. But with that, we're now at the top 13, the 13 players left in the game, where here I'll be ranking them based on how likely I feel like they are to win the game, which again will largely be based around Edgic and how I perceive these people to be portrayed on the show, and talking about the storyline set up with them, more so than gameplay, which we will talk about, but again won't be as integral to the overall ranking itself. But with that, let's start off at number 13, the person I think is least likely to win the game at this point. is J Maya. And this is a shame because I do actually really like J Maya. I think J Maya seems like a really fun personality. She's someone that is at least playing pretty hard, seemingly. But really in the game, it feels like she's bad on both fronts, both from a gameplay perspective to where she seems to be aloof at the real pecking order on Reba to where she's on the bottom and doesn't recognize it. Well, also has the plan of like taking the blame for Dee's vote, and all that seems extremely misguided. While on the other side of things, you have her edit, which is almost non-existent until the swap, only for swap content to be mostly bad. I mean, I will say I did think there was at least a chance at recovery after last episode to where I could see a world where following the Sean quit, it could have been the start of this like Erica style trajectory in her game. But I feel like this episode really just sunk her even more. I feel like despite the fact that she is being shown more post-swap here, she's shown as being a bit misguided in the game, where again, we know that the Rebas have a core 4 that she's on the outs of, yet she's still targeting Sefue. She has a set up rivalry with Sefue at this point, but that doesn't feel like a rivalry that has much substance to it, doesn't have much development within it. Just feels like a thing that was sprung up on us recently. Again, her recent content is simply just not that good. I mean, she spends all of episode 4 trying to save Sean, only for Sean to quit at the very end, which feels like a negative turn for her at that point. You also have this last episode where she's essentially agreeing to making herself the decoy target, despite the fact that she thinks that there's an idol in play. And again, mixing down the fact that she was near invisible for first 3 episodes, her edit is just kind of bad, and I think at this point pretty irredeemable. Now, to be fair, I mean, obviously with certain other recent winners, I've been completely wrong at this point in the game. You had Erica, you had Gabler, both of which I had towards the bottom of my power rankings for both of those respective seasons. But even with like Gabler, I feel like the signs were there. I mean, Erica is a bit more of a wonky case, but at least with Erica, she was mostly invisible throughout the entire pre-merge. I feel like J Maya is peaking here before the merge even happens. For a lot of that to be not super flattering, I feel like is giving me the indication that she's not on this Erica style trajectory at this point. I think she is pretty much doomed on this season. Now, I don't necessarily know how her game is going to go, considering the fact that, again, she's at the merge now. I mean, you would think there'll be bigger targets than her, though at the same time, the mergatory vote in particular is a very wonky one, where considering the amount of people that can be safe and considering how expendable a number J Maya seems to be, I could see a world where like J Maya is collateral there. But beyond that, again, like she probably should be set up for a pretty deep run, considering why I have to go J Maya outside of just needing an easy person to get rid of. But I really just don't see a winning trajectory for her on this season. So again, for me, she's here at 13. Now, number 12, we have a person that I've been conflicted with this person's edit for a bit. However, I feel like this last episode just sunk it even more. And at number 12, we do have Bruce. And the fact that this is Bruce from Survivor 44 is insane to me. I mean, Bruce is obviously coming off as a very different character than I was expecting. I did not realize how wacky of a figure he'd be on the show. But Bruce is getting this edit that I've seen like a lot of these comparisons between Bruce and Gabler recently. And I really don't agree with those comparisons really at all. I feel like the thing with Gabler in his edit was that every single time he would be portrayed negatively in an episode, they would still give him the time by the end of that episode to turn that around. I feel like there's very rarely an episode early on with Gabler where he comes out of it without any redeeming quality to him. Well, I feel like with Bruce, it's like it's almost all negative. And Bruce is simply just not getting time to actually explain himself in the episode. We're getting a lot of this negative content about him, and sometimes we are getting other people talk positively about him, like Jake in particular. But Bruce himself isn't able to respond to any of this. And for me, that is why I feel like Bruce is screwed in this game. I don't think Bruce is winning this season. Or again, I think you could argue there could be this like Gabler style trajectory for him if that wasn't the case, but I don't even think that is the case at this point. I think Bruce is an early merge boot. I would not be shocked if he's the mergatory boot in particular. Again, I feel like this setup rivalry with Katurah is set up in a way that it feels very similar to the Gabler-Ellie relationship, to the Jam-Josh relationship of this rivalry that culminates at mergatory. And even if he does survive mergatory, I still think he's a very prime target early on in the merge. We already have Caleb talking about how when the time comes, they're going to vote him out. And it just very much feels like Bruce is not long for this game. Like, I'll be surprised if he makes it beyond the early merge phase, like beyond like the final 10 or so. It just feels like his storylines are kind of culminating at this point, where it feels like for a lot of the season, obviously it was this Bruce versus Katurah rivalry, but now we're getting more people jumping in on how much they don't like Bruce. Or it does feel like this is coming to a head, and I do feel like Bruce is on the losing side of all this, especially considering this latest episode with Caleb now joining in. Like, I do feel like Bruce is not long for the game, and straight up, Bruce also just doesn't seem like a good player, really at all. I mean, it does feel like he would have been the first boot from Bello had they gone to Tribal. He really should have come into this season with a lot of good grace. I mean, like, he was in a prime position coming into this season with everyone feeling bad for him and wanting to work with him, and instead now he's turned a lot of his own tribe against him and is now looking like this prime target early on the merge. Again, it's kind of like blowing this like massive opportunity in the game. So I really feel like Bruce's run here ends up being a bit disappointing gameplay-wise, though again, he's still a really fun character. At least he's present on the show, even though he himself isn't able to talk about that, which is also a massive negative. Considering he is actually tied for the lowest amount of confessionals on the season alongside J. Maya and the next person we'll be talking about, which is all a bad sign as well. So again, for me, I do have Bruce here at number 12. Now, number 11, another person I don't feel that good about, but I think if any of these three edits are going to recover, I think it's probably this third person, and that person is Sefue. And again, I don't think Sefue's winning this season. I think Sefue is very likely also an early merge boot. I think alongside Bruce, I would say is probably the next prime can to be taken out at Mergatory as this like really expendable number that no one really trusts. However, I think edit wise, I think there's at least a chance. Like, I think Sefue's edit for me was pretty bad up until last episode. I think last episode where he gets blindsided and now knows that he's on the bottom feels like this point where it could be a reset. It feels like this point where his edit could shift, and to be honest, this episode was just fine for him. I think enough to kind of leave the door open for a potential resurgence post-merge. Now, do I think it'll happen? No. But I do think out of him, Bruce, and J. Maya, who I think are three very unlikely winners at this point, I think Sefue's the only one of those I could see turn around post-merge, where I could see a world where this changes into Sefue recognizing his position and having this Erica-style uptick. But again, do I think it'll actually happen? No, I don't. I think Sefue's probably just an early merge boot. I think that makes a lot of sense based on his portrayal, and also the fact that, again, he seems to have like no numbers in this game. Also, the fact that people assume he has an idol is also not great. And also from an edit perspective, I mean, the fact that he has gotten very few confessionals, despite the fact that he is this like big presence on the show, I think it's probably a pretty negative sign that there isn't really much depth to his edit. Or again, like for me, it very much feels like his edit is essentially alongside Bruce's. I think they're very similar, though I feel like Sefue has less direct negativity, along with also, again, I think probably has a chance of recovering afterwards, which is the very minor difference that puts him above him at number 11. Now, number 10, we're moving on to a player that I just don't really know what to do with. I feel like this is someone that is there on the show, they're present, they're getting content, but I feel like none of that feels like there's much depth to it. But at number 10, I do have Julie. And again, Julie just feels like she's kind of there. Again, she's being able to talk about her tribe dynamics and seems to be involved in the tribe, but doesn't really get to do much beyond that. I mean, we do have this setup duo between her and Dee, but I think clearly Dee is set up as the alpha of the two and the one that's more likely to win than Julie. I think clearly Julie's being set up for longevity, where obviously we have this like core four being set up that she's a part of, which seems to be the most important alliance coming into this merge, considering the fact that they seem to be the alliance that got the most focus on. But Julie herself doesn't feel like she has much depth to her character. Like, I feel like the show hasn't really spent the time to really develop her character, where we got like a very brief scene of her mentioning her personal content, but none of that really plays into like the overall theme of the season, where just in general, it feels like the theme of this season is authenticity and this debate between being authentic to yourself or playing up a role. And Julie really doesn't fit into that theme really at all. And again, like for me, Julie is just simply there. I mean, I think she'll be here for a while. I don't see her going anytime soon. In many ways, I can kind of see her being like the Heather to Dee's Erica, of her making it very far, probably going out at like fire making or like final 5, or even could be a losing finalist. But I don't see a winning trajectory for Julie. Like, it really doesn't feel like the edit is really taking their time to really show Julie as this competent player, especially considering that we literally see her try so hard to save Sefue in the following episode. And while she technically gets her way from Sean quitting, I feel like we clearly see her own allies not being on board with that. So I really just don't feel like Julie's winning this season. So for me, she's here at number 10. Now, number 9, we have a player that this is actually the lowest I've had them all season. This is a person that I've been decently-ish high on for a lot of the early season, but I think this is the point where I gotta drop them. At number 9, I do have Kendra. And Kendra is someone that I had at number 2 just a few episodes ago, where Kendra is a player that has a lot of good things on paper. I mean, I do think the fact that she's part of the all-women group on Bello, which was the first alliance to be set up in the season, really the only alliance to be set up in episode 1, I think was a positive for her. I think the fact that she had this like setup of her relationship with Jake is positive for her, to where that's part of the reason why I was very confident she was going to make the merge here, or I had no doubt she was going to go home in this latest episode, as I do assume that relationship's going to end up being important to her game at some point down the road. And again, we are getting these like segments for Kendra as her being this like big personality. I still feel like beyond that though, we don't really know much about Kendra as a person. We just know her as this like wacky figure on the show. It doesn't feel like she's gotten much actual personal content talking about her life outside the show. Beyond that, I do feel like Kendra just has some pretty glaring red flags in her edit at this point, to where again, like for a while I've been holding her up as someone that could have her edit like really peak at the merge. I think I've kind of let go of that at this point. While it's not entirely impossible, I think there's definitely still a world where Kendra's edit can turn around the merge and she becomes this big player. I don't see it as super likely anymore. Again, like there's just too many red flags for me at this point, where you do have episode 1, the fact that they cut out her entire visit to Lulu, which again, like I understand them cutting it out. It makes a lot of sense. Obviously they don't have much time in the premiere. I don't even understand how they thought it was a good idea to have that in the premiere, but yeah, it makes a lot of sense why they cut that out. But again, still definitely a knock against Kendra. It wasn't that damning for me, as again, I understand why they would cut it out, but again, the fact that they didn't show it, and the fact that it also plays a major factor until the last vote, is a bit more damning to me now, where I think the fact that we saw none of Brando and Kendra's dynamics on the new Bello after swap, I think is extremely damning. Like literally Brando and Kendra were the only 2 people to not get any content post swap, and I think that's really bad. The fact that again we get this like setup of this being this battle for Emily's vote, yet we see it entirely from the Austin and Drew perspective, see none of the Kendra perspective, especially when we learn from Exit Press that she had a relationship with Emily from her initial visit. The fact that none of that made the show is bad. And mixing that in episode 5, where again it very much feels like they're still portraying her as this like really wacky character, and they also show her being kind of tricked by Brando. The fact that she believes that Drew threw out the idea, when we see on the show that was Brando that threw out the idea of voting for her. Again, it's starting to show her wrong as well. And again, I just feel like it's just too much at this point. There's too many red flags. I can't really look at her as a true contender at this point. And while again, who knows, it might turn around. And again, straight up with New Era seasons, it does very much feel like the pre-merge doesn't matter that much anymore, to where as long as the edit doesn't completely sink you, it can turn around for you post-merge. But I just feel like Kendra is looking less and less likely as time goes on. So for me, I have her here at number 9. Now number 8, and really we're moving on to this batch of people here that I think are getting good edits in terms of they're very present on the show and they are portrayed as big players, even pretty good players, but I just feel like their edits don't have much substance to them, especially from a winning perspective. And then at number 8, we're starting that off with Caleb. Again, it's funny when looking at my power rank for Caleb. I literally started him off at number 12 after episode 1, and he's climbed up 1 spot every single episode, but he's at number 8 now. And I don't think Caleb is winning this season. I think Caleb has the pretty typical edit of like a big player that gets taken out around the early to mid-merge phase of the game. Like, I don't think Caleb is winning the season. His edit very much reminds me of someone like a Vetus, to where even then Vetus had more personal content. Vetus at least had the story about him going to jail and his rivalry with Aris, while like Caleb doesn't even really have that. But and that is kind of the vibe I get from Caleb, this person that we're supposed to be looking at as this like really strong player. However, people are sketched out by how smarmy he is, and again, I don't see a long road for Caleb. Now, before this week, I would have said Caleb is probably one of the first few boots after the merge. I thought he was probably going to be 12th, 11th place. I do feel like after this episode, though, I just feel like there are so many other people that could be in that spot. I feel like Bruce and Sefue are bigger targets in front of him. And again, we are getting this like setup relationship with him and Katurah. We also have him and Kelly. We have him and Jake. It's like he's getting these relationships now to where it does feel like there could be this path for him to get further into the game. I just don't think it's a winning path. Again, I just do not see how he gets to the end and wins. He just seems like too big of a target at this point in the game. It feels like the edit is even portraying him as a big target in the game. So while I do feel like he could have a lot of control early on the merge, particularly in the fact that he is part of the Lulu 2 now, and how they just have so many options with it very clearly being set up to be this like Bello versus Reba battle at the merge. I just don't see Caleb being able to stay around for the entirety of the season. I don't feel like the edit is really supporting that either, considering the lack of depth he seems to be getting, where again, like it really feels like he is getting a lot of content simply because it's necessary to the story. But it doesn't really feel like the editors are taking the time to actually develop his character that much. Or really, like, outside of him being a salesman, we know nothing about Caleb outside the show. We simply just know him as being this, like, very charismatic guy, which, again, is kind of necessary for the story, considering that's the way that everyone perceives him on the show. Again, he was very much important on Lulu, but that was because he had to be. And I think really for me, the biggest damning thing from him edit-wise is his premiere. Like, his premiere is terrible. Or again, literally his first confessional of the season is him talking about how great Sabiyah is. He's not even talking about himself. He's talking about Sabiyah, who is gone, and that he ended up voting out. Beyond that, his episode 2 was largely based around how he's mentoring Emily. Like, his edit feels like it's more so focused on his relationships with other people than it is about himself. And again, I just feel like Caleb is not set up for a win on this season. And because of that, for me, he's here at number 8. Now, number 7. Essentially, same thing on paper, but I think at least has more going for him. At number 7, I do have Austin. And Austin's been funny for me in the power ranking, where I literally had him at number 8 for the entire season up to this point, to where he's moved up one spot. And again, Austin, I do not think is winning this season. I think, like Caleb, his edit feels very surface level. It feels like an edit that's there because it had to be. It feels like he's a big player on this season. He's this major figure on Reba. He's found these advantages. He also obviously had the journey this last episode. It was very important to getting Emily on board. Like, it feels like he's getting a lot of content, but it's content that needs to be there. And beyond that, again, I don't know anything about Austin as a person. I don't feel like we've even gotten a single bit of personal content about Austin, where I could not tell you a single thing about Austin's life outside the show, to where again, it very much doesn't feel like they've really developed him as a person on this season. Now, again, game-wise, he seems to be one of the better players out there. It does feel like he is coming into the merge with a lot of power, but to me, it doesn't really translate to win equity edit-wise, where, like, if I were to guess, I do think the Reba side of things is going to win out, at least initially, considering how much focus has been put onto the Reba alliance, to where I'll be very surprised that alliance crumbles right away after the merge. And again, that's part of the reason why Austin is higher than Caleb, is because he does have this setup alliance that is very much screaming out for longevity. Beyond that, he obviously has the duo with Drew, which also seems very important to the season. Like, I feel like Austin's edit has more going for him, but it's still not really enough. Like, I don't think Austin's winning this season. Like, kind of like Caleb, I kind of expect him to be like a mid-merge boot. I don't really see him winning, but like Caleb, I think he's being portrayed as a very good player, but not really much beyond that on the show. So again, for me, he's here at number 7. Now number 6, and this might be a bit controversial, considering I'm pretty sure this person is looked at as like one of the top Edgic front runners. And like, to be fair, I had this person pretty high, but I do feel like I'm personally starting to lose faith in this person winning. And at number 6, I do have Kelly. And again, for me, Kelly just feels like, again, another edit similar to Austin and to Caleb, in being this like very surface level edit that is simply there because she's important to the game dynamics. Now, I will say, I do think there's like a little bit more there with Kelly's edit, and the fact that she does have personal content, the fact that she does talk about being a nurse. She also has a lot of setup dynamics that are still relevant to the game. Again, she has the all-women alliance from Bello. She had her relationship with Brando set up, even though that's not super relevant anymore. But now she has a new setup relationship with Caleb. She's getting to voice a lot about her opinions on Bruce. Like, she definitely is prevalent in the edit. But to me, I just feel like a lot of it doesn't feel like it has much substance to it. And none of it really plays on this theme of authenticity. Like, it just feels like content that's there because it has to be. It feels like it's there because she is a strong player on Bello. She is in the middle of everything and proceeds to then be in the middle of everything on Lulu. Like, it feels like she's getting content because she's important to the season, more so than the editors going out of their way to give her content. Now, I will say, if this was older school Survivor, Kelly would be a top contender for me. I do think Kelly does have the makings of what used to be looked at as this traditional winner edit. I mean, her edit does feel kind of reminiscent of Tommy's. Again, probably less personal content than Tommy, but still, like, on the same level. I could see a world where you can compare this to, like, Sarah Lacina, but that's just simply not the way that seasons are edited anymore. Where, obviously, the new era in itself has been this very unique unique editing style. But even then, even with 39 and 34, the 2 seasons I just mentioned, those are seasons that had very icky circumstances surrounding them, to where I feel like the editors went out of their way to try to portray their winners in a more positive light, where this season so far doesn't really have that. Kelly's edit just feels so surface level, so just kind of generic, to where it doesn't really fit in line with a recent winner edit. Again, like we have Erica and Gabler, who have very unique winner edits, both of which not really popping until after the merge. And then you have like Marianne and Jam Jam, who were always these like consistent through lines, who had these like major storylines set up. Kelly doesn't really have that. I mean, like Kelly just simply seems to be there because of game reasons, more so than her having these like storylines that are going to develop and progress her moving forward. Like, I really don't know where Kelly is going, to be honest. If I were to guess, I would say like a mid-merge boot, where I could see her continuing to be propped up as a good player. As again, literally in this episode, Kelly was talked about as a good player from Caleb, but again, I just don't really see that leading up to a win, especially in the modern editing style. So again, for me, I have Kelly here, number 6. Now number 5, and here we're moving on to a person that, straight up, I don't think this person's going to win either. However, I think this person at least has more of a connection to the theme of the season. And at number 5, I do have Drew. And okay, Drew's had a pretty rough stretch recently. Again, after the first 2 episodes, I was very high on Drew. I do feel like his last few episodes have not been as strong. I do feel like him getting caught looking for the idol, and the concept from D about her and Julie clocking them, I think is pretty bad. And I think this last episode was also just really bad. I mean, the fact that we see Brando wanting to work with him and him just turning him down, and us getting confessionals about Brando being disappointed he can't work with Drew, I think is really bad for Drew. And along with the fact that he's not able to convince Emily, and the edit seems to give a lot more credit to Austin for Emily staying on their side. Again, this is bad. Like, it is pretty bad. Like, and this was a pretty damning episode. But again, like, for me, the main thing that keeps Drew up is the fact that he at least connects to the theme of authenticity, where unlike the people we just talked about that I think have no real connection to that theme, this thing that is very clearly set up in the premiere as this major theme of the season, something that Jeff himself has mentioned in the On Fire podcast, like Drew at least connects to that. Drew talked about in the first episode about how he has 2 different sides to him. He has the Drew and the Bastille side of things that very much feels like him playing to this authenticity theme, and the fact that he has 2 different types of authenticity. He has the 2 different sides to him that, again, after the first 2 episodes, I thought was a perfect introduction to his character. I thought it was perfectly fitting into his theme and showing him fit into both sides of the theme. There's a side where you should be authentic to yourself, while there's the other side where you should play up this role, where everyone that we're going to be talking about moving forward fits into that theme to a degree. And again, Drew felt like this perfect medium, where through that confessional, it felt like he could have played on both sides of that. However, I don't feel like his edit beyond that has really supported that much, and I feel like his negative turn in recent episodes is not great, to where it very much screams out to me that, again, I think he's going to be a big player. I think he probably is going to have a lot of longevity on this season, but I think he's probably not going to quite make it to the end. Like, I think his edit is kind of screaming out more so like a Jesse edit to me at this point, of a player that makes a very deep run but doesn't quite squeeze out the win by the end. I could also see a world where he's like booted at like, I don't know, final 7 or so and doesn't even quite make endgame, because actually that's what I thought was going to happen to Jesse for a lot of that season. Like, I kind of see that with Drew. I do think he's going to make it past the likes of like a Caleb and an Austin and some of these other figures that don't have much depth to their edits, but I don't really see Drew squeezing his way to the very end. I do not see him winning, but I think the path is at least there through him having this direct connection to the theme. I think his more recent episodes have had this negative tinge to where I think it's less and less likely that he actually gets to the end. At number 4, moving on to a person that I've seen some people completely take this person out of winner contention, to which I obviously disagree. Even though this person's edit is just very weird, and I do feel like it is a pretty inconsistent edit, but it's one that I think at least has the road to recovery. At number 4, I do have Katurah. And Katurah's been a weird person for me, as on my power ranking, I literally had her at number 1 after the premiere, and she's continued to drop 1 spot every episode until this one, to where she remains at 4. And again, I think Katurah is still one of the more likely winners of this season. I do think Katurah can win this season. I think she directly plays into the theme of authenticity, her being on the opposite side of what I think you would typically expect Survivor to want. You would think Survivor would want you to be authentic. However, she fully plays into the opposite side of that, of someone that is not authentic to the rest of her players, someone that is hiding the fact that she's a lawyer, which again, that got a major focus in the premiere. But even beyond that, we're seeing her seemingly hide her hatred of Bruce for the confessional. Now, truth be told, I think probably it's very clear on the island how much she hates Bruce, but at least from the way the edit is portraying it, we're not seeing Bruce's perspective of him not liking Katurah. That makes me feel like, again, edit-wise, it very much plays into this aspect of her not being authentic on the island. And again, I think Katurah fully plays into the themes of the season. However, I think a lot of that does come from episode 1. And I think her episode 1 is very strong. Again, that's why I had her at number 1 at that point. I do think her edit has become pretty one note since then. It's become a lot of just bashing on Bruce. It's become so focused on her relationship with Bruce. It's where, again, 100%, I think this is going to culminate pretty soon. I think, if not the Mergatory itself, I think immediately afterwards. I do not see this Katurah-Bruce rivalry lasting too much longer on this season, but I do think it is this rivalry that is probably good for her edit in the long term. Now, again, I don't love how entirely focused her edit was in episodes 2, 3, and 4 over this, but I do feel like an interesting aspect of it, though, is that she's starting to be proven as right about Bruce, where initially, again, it came off as this kind of like misguided hatred of Bruce, where it felt like she was the only one that hated Bruce, but now we're getting, again, Kelly talking about her annoyances of Bruce. We have Caleb talking about his annoyances of Bruce, and it feels like Katurah is getting supported in her hatred of Bruce at this point. So again, I think that's a good sign for Katurah in that light. But also, again, I just feel like Katurah could definitely turn around the merge. I could definitely see a world where Katurah gets out Bruce, and from that point forward, her edit just completely turns around. It feels like this new start for her. And again, considering her edit in the premiere, I think there's enough there to really still solidify a winning edit for Katurah. And also, if we're looking back at the last 2 seasons, again, both of the winners of those seasons had these really big rivalries set up early on. Again, Ellie and Gabler. You had Jam Jam and Josh. Like, this feels like that rivalry for this season, to where, again, I 100% think Katurah is going to beat Bruce on this season at this point. I think it was a little bit up in the air for the last couple episodes, but I do think at this point, it's 100% solidified. I do not see a world where Katurah doesn't beat Bruce in this battle. It very much feels like Bruce is being set up for the fall. To where if that's the case, then if Katurah is the one to then win, then that would mean that Katurah is like the Jam Jam or the Gabler, to where she could potentially go on the win from that point on. And again, I do think Katurah has a lot to like, but there are also still the red flags. Again, the fact that her edit is so one note in going for Bruce in the middle of it is pretty bad. Also, this last episode, we have confessionals about how she's not that good of a player after she gets caught for looking for the idol. Again, that is bad. That is bad content for sure. But I think her edit is probably one of the more likely to turn around post-merge, especially once her rivalry with Bruce culminates. That's why, for me, I have her here at number 4. Now, number 3, we're moving on to a person I was actually pretty low on for a lot of the season, but I feel like his edit has really turned around in the last couple of episodes, and in this last episode in particular. At number 3, I do have Jake. And truth be told, do I think Jake is actually winning this season? No. However, I think Jake is someone that can still win this season. I do think his edit is still in this path to where I could definitely see a world where post-merge, his edit really peaks again. Like, I do think his episode 1 was a bit rocky, not entirely bad, as again, he is still connected to the theme of authenticity. He is shown as being the person that is authentic. He is, again, on the other side of this conflict with Katurah, where he's shown as the person that is being authentic while she's being inauthentic, where he's being honest about being a lawyer. Now, in actuality, I believe he is lying about the type of lawyer that he is, but again, that wasn't on the show. As far as the show is concerned, again, he is being authentic with his job, and that is him playing into the theme of authenticity. Now, beyond that, I feel like his edit, again, wasn't particularly great in episode 2. He felt like he was on the bottom alongside Bruce and seemed like a relatively early boot, but then he seems to recover, where, again, I think his relationship with Kendra seems to be one that I would expect to be pretty important post-merge. It feels like it was there for a reason, to where we haven't really seen that reason yet. So I could definitely see a world where they become like a power duo post-merge. And again, post-swap, we're seeing other relationships. We're seeing him build a relationship with Caleb. We see that he still has this relationship with Bruce. He obviously got the personal content in this last episode, which I think was really strong content from him, particularly in how it weaves into the events of the story. It doesn't feel like it's completely out of the blue, though I guess with that, you can say some pros and cons for that style of personal content as well. But yeah, I think Jake's edit is definitely on the uptick. I think he had a very rough beginning to the season, but one that, again, like still had these like semblances of positivity. So I think now, again, with his relationship with Kendra, with his relationship with Caleb, and now his really strong personal content, I could definitely see his edit completely turning around once we get to merge. Though I think something interesting about this last episode, though, is that he did have that confessional where he specifically said that he would rather be voted out than pulled from the game, to where through that, I think it does lead to some worry about that being foreshadowing. Though really, I feel like it could be foreshadowing to anything. It could be foreshadowing to him getting medevac, it could be foreshadowing to him getting voted out. It could also be a foreshadowing to neither of those things happening. He gets to the end and never gets voted out. Like, it literally could be anything. So, like, really, I don't think we'll know the true message of that until we see his result on the season. But just in general, Jake is someone that I think is on the way up. I do think he is someone that can still win, especially if his edit turns around post-merge. Do I realistically see it happening? Probably not. Like, to where I would actually probably feel more faith in Katurah than Jake, but I just feel like Katurah probably has a bit more red flags, to where that's why I have Jake higher than her here at number 3. Now, number 2, and I'm really the top 2 here are pretty definitive. I think these are by far the 2 most likely people to win this season. However, I think there's a pretty big dichotomy between the 2. I think one is clearly this big character that's being the main character of the season, while the other is not as much, but is still getting this like very strange content, and it's still super prevalent on this show. I think it's pretty close between the 2, and even though I think this person's probably a bit more consistent, at number 2, I'm actually going to go with Emily. And again, this swapped for me at the last second. I was very much going to go Emily 1 and the next person at 2. However, I decided to go Emily at 2, despite the fact that I think her edit is actually pretty consistent. Again, I do think she had obviously a rough premiere, but then is immediately able to turn that around in episode 2 and is able to learn from Caleb, to where we see her show off her strategic chops in episodes 3 and 4, showing her turnaround in the game. We're seeing all of her perspective. We're seeing so much of her point of view in the game. The problem is that that's not really how female winners are portrayed, where typically female winners are not these like big, boisterous characters on the show. And again, that could change for sure. And again, I had Carolyn number 1 last year because I thought that was a potential to change there, but it didn't happen. And Carolyn still lost, which makes me less confident in Emily here to actually change that around. Like, I could definitely see a world where Emily ends up being a losing finalist. I could see a world where she's also someone that is cut right at the end as this person that goes on this journey edit, which, I mean, to be fair, again, I've talked about this before, that I don't think journey edits are really a thing in Modern Survivor. I do think from production's perspective, everyone is on a journey. So I could definitely see a world in Modern Survivor where they would give someone a journey edit, despite them eventually winning. But still, I feel less confident about Emily actually being that person, especially after the Carolyn loss from last season. But again, I think her edit is the most consistent of the bunch. I think she has this very solid through line on the season about her development and her learning more about herself. We have her relationship with Caleb and how Caleb mentored her. For again, it very much feels like this potential apprentice becoming better than their master. And again, considering just how much of a main character Emily seems to be on this season, again, I think there's a lot to like. However, again, I think for me, the downsides are, again, she's just so much the main character on the season that feels a bit too much. She feels a bit overexposed. Not true be told, I think longevity wise, I do not see a world where Emily is not an endgamer. I'll be shocked if she's not really even in the finale. Like, I think Emily should be in this for the long haul. She seems to be coming to emerge in a very strong position as well, being one of the only Lulus left, being in the middle of the game. Like, I think Emily's position as a power player is going to continue. And again, I think her win equity at the end is simply just going to come down to perception. At the same time, I thought the same thing of Carolyn. And really, again, that's the main thing holding me back with Emily, is just these comparisons to Carolyn. I feel like I felt pretty good about Carolyn at this point in the season, then it just goes away post-merge. And I could definitely see a route where that is the case with Emily. And I will say, I didn't love her last episode either. I thought episode 5 was kind of a bad episode for Emily. While we are seeing her perspective, it also felt like a misguided perspective. A perspective where we are shown her being wrong. We see her being wrong about Drew, and her talking about how Drew is lying to her when we know that Drew isn't lying to her. And again, I think that is bad as well. Now, as a whole, I do think Emily fits into the authenticity theme obviously extremely well. I think that's really a lot of the basis around her storylines about how she is so authentic. And again, has probably one of the most solid through lines on the season, but I just feel like, again, like looking back at last season with Carol and what happened there, I just don't feel as confident about her winning this season. Though I think there definitely is still a major shot of it. But because of that, for me, I do have her at number 2. Now, number 1, the person at the top of my mid-season power ranking, the person I think is the most likely to win at this point, is D, which is strange, largely the fact that I feel like there's a lot of conflicting messages with D. Well, again, if you were to put a gun to my head and say, who is the person that's winning this season? Again, I would say D, but I do feel like there's a lot of just like weird aspects to her portrayal on this season. where I think there are massive pros to have for her edit. The fact that she has gotten a good chunk of content despite not seeming to be the most integral person to the storyline up to this point, I think is a very good sign for her. She also has gotten multiple personal segments so far. I got this segment about her big toe, which was weird, but it very much felt like that was a scene that was in there for a reason. Jeff himself has said on the On Fire podcast that scene was there for a reason, which very much implies to me that she's going to win some sort of challenge due to her big toe, which obviously screams out longevity there, along with the fact that she has very set up relationships, obviously the core four, alongside her relationship with Julie. We have this like rivalry sort of with her and Sefue. It's like she has these like set up dynamics in the game, but also again, she also got this really big personal segment in this last episode. Now, again, I think there are some pros and cons that come with that, though. As I mentioned before, Jake, it feels like her personal content there felt a bit more superfluous. It didn't feel like there was as much reason to it, which can be a pro and a con. It could be a pro in the fact that, okay, this person's going to win, so because of that, we want to give them this personal content, even though it's not super necessary. But it also could be a con in potentially Dee going home relatively soon, and them thinking, well, we won't have much other time to give her this personal content, so we'll give it to her now. I think you could kind of see it in both ways, though I think for the most part it's a positive, especially considering how very few people have gotten personal content across this season up to this point. Though I think an interesting aspect of the edit, though, is how that segment was introduced, where it was introduced by Dee talking about how she'll never give up and how she essentially wouldn't be like Sean, which again is the editors trashing on Sean once again, which again you would expect them to do. You could definitely tell how not happy production was with the Sean quit. Again, not surprised that they would like throw that in, but again, I feel like the setup of this juxtaposition between Sean and Dee is also a pretty big positive for Dee, and them showing her as the complete opposite as this person that they clearly don't like. I also feel like Dee's edit kind of just feels largely toneless as well, where I don't know what we're supposed to be getting from Dee, where I just don't know like how we're supposed to be perceiving Dee on the show, to where, I mean, to be fair, in that light, like she kind of reminds me of someone like a Sarah Lacina in how she was portrayed, though at the same time Sarah Lacina's pre-merge edit was a lot more subdued than Dee's, where Dee is a lot more prevalent, though at the same time, again, as I mentioned before, again, the editing styles between modern era and Game Changers are vastly different. We're just following with trends. Again, usually the pre-merge edit is a quieter one for women. Again, Erica obviously was almost invisible. Even Marianne, while she was a big character, felt like her edit was largely minimalized early on, so outside of what was necessary. Like Dee's edit is a lot more prominent, and too fair, they have 90-minute episodes, they can spend more time setting her up, but it does feel like for a female winner, she's like a bit too prominent. I think makes her a bit questionable to me. Again, like I just feel like there are definitely things that feel like a little bit off with Dee's edit, to where we also have episode 4, which I thought was a mostly bad episode for her. Now, I thought it was good in the sense that she at least wasn't that prominent in it, but I think like from a gameplay front it was pretty bad. But again, like the fact that she wasn't that prominent in her wanting to target Sefue was probably a net positive for her, especially considering, again, episode 5 pretty much rebounds that anyway. And in relation to the authenticity theme, it does very much feel like they're kind of shoehorning her into that, where it doesn't feel like she has much substance within that theme, which is definitely a negative for her. But it does feel like she's getting these confessionals at points of her talking about how this isn't how I would be in real life, but I'm playing the game, and like that sort of thing, to where it feels like that kind of attaches herself to the theme pretty subtly, which again, I do think her not connecting to the theme as much as the likes of Emily or Jake or Katurah are definitely red flags in themselves, to where, like, really just in general, again, I feel like her edit is still extremely wonky. But again, if you were to ask me who is the most likely person to win this season at this point, I do feel like that person is Dee. So despite all of my hiccups with her edit along the way, I do feel like just the amount of like really random content that they're giving her, along with just how set up her position in the game seems to be, and how much time they've taken to flesh out her character when it doesn't even feel like a character that's that necessary to really flesh out, makes it so I feel the most confident about Dee here. Of course, she's here at number 1. But there we go. I mean, that is my mid-season power ranking for Survivor 45. Now, obviously, like every other season, I'll do a very long season review at the very end of it, along with a player ranking for the season as well. Obviously, you also have BB25 ending very soon, to where you could definitely expect a season review and player ranking of that, which I should mention the fact that my BB25 review is already longer than any other season review I've done in the past, so stay tuned for that. Also, I have more Survivor videos coming up before the end of the season, things like a cast ranking based on gameplay. I have my top 10 characters of all time, my history of the runner-up edit, What if the final jurors were finalists? Like, there's still some stuff coming up. There's still stuff like that coming up down the road, alongside the fact that we still have Amazing Race 35 and Survivor UK literally starting the day that this video is coming out, which I'm still a bit up in the air on how exactly I'm going to cover it. I think I might have to delay the review and player ranking until 2024, but we'll see. And just in general, if you want to follow my opinions on the season as it's going on, you can follow me at twitch.tv/TheMarine where I stream at 11 p.m. Eastern time after every episode, so you can catch me there. But until then, that's what I got from Mid-Season Power Ranking. Thank you for watching.